Good afternoon and welcome to the Texas Public Policy Foundation for this special live stream. My name is Andrew Brown and I have the privilege of overseeing child and family policy for the foundation. We thank you all for your flexibility. We'd originally intended for this to be live and in person, but due to weather and school closures in the Austin area, we have had to pivot and go all online. But we are very grateful to our panelists for also making that shift with us. If you follow the news, you're likely aware that the Texas foster care system is facing a critical moment as it continues to struggle with finding safe, stable placements for children. And into this space, in the wake of COVID-19, the state lost more than 1,000 beds for foster children, leading to a dramatic spike in the number of children who entered the system without a place to go. Between August 2020 and July 2021, the number of what is known as children without placement, or CWAP for short, skyrocketed from 47 to 416. That's a 785% increase. These children, who are often older or require more specialized care, are spending more and more time sleeping in offices, hotel rooms, and unlicensed temporary placement. While the CWAP numbers are beginning to come down, they still remain unacceptably high. Adding to the complexity, the state remains under a decade-old federal lawsuit stemming from unsafe conditions in the system and poor treatment of children. The judge's order in that case requires Texas to comply with a number of remedial measures, including heightened oversight of foster care providers. In response to the lawsuit, the legislature enacted sweeping reforms aimed at transforming the state's foster care system while injecting billions of dollars into the system over the last several years. While some progress is being made at improving foster care, owing largely to these efforts, the progress in transforming and implementing these reforms has been painfully slow. A discussion of the challenges facing the Texas foster care system is necessary to set the stage for what our real goal is today, which is to talk about the solutions and the practical steps each of you can take to help. Joining me today for this very important conversation are leading experts on the front lines of serving our state's most vulnerable children. Representative John Lujan was originally going to just attend in person, but because he was in town and we had to shift to the live stream, we persuaded him to join our panel today at the last minute. So other lawmakers, if you're ever in the TPPF building, there's a very high likelihood that you may be roped into a live stream, so be prepared accordingly. Representative Lujan was first elected in 2016 to represent Texas House District 118. A native of San Antonio, he's dedicated his life to serving his hometown, first as a deputy in the Bexar County Sheriff's Department, and later in the San Antonio Fire Department, a position he held for over 25 years. Today, he's a business owner who grew a small IT firm into a thriving business employing over 500 people in his community. Representative Lujan and his wife, Freda, have been married for 37 years and are the proud parents of 5 boys, 3 of whom are adopted. Katie Olse is the CEO of the Texas Alliance of Child and Family Services, our co-sponsor for today's event. Prior to being named CEO of the Alliance in 2016, Katie served as the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Family and Protective Services and Chief of Staff for the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. In addition to roles in state government, Katie has expertise in a nonprofit arena, focusing on issues impacting health and human services, criminal justice, education, and mental health. She holds a bachelor's degree from Indiana University and has also completed graduate studies at the Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. Last but not least, Stacy Johnson is the founder and CEO of Central Texas Table of Grace, located just up I-35 from the TPPF headquarters in Round Rock, Texas. Central Texas Table of Grace is an emergency shelter serving children and youth in the foster care system. Having grown up in the foster care system herself, Stacy knows firsthand the challenges that these children face. Her personal story and her service to our community are truly inspiring, and I'm excited for you to hear her story directly from her. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Representative Lujan, I want to start with you. And again, we appreciate you joining us at the last minute to lend your expertise to our conversation today. Your connection to this issue as an adoptive father is deeply personal. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your family story and how you bring that to your role as a state representative.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. Yeah, y'all wrote me in, but it was an easy rope because I enjoy speaking on these topics because we need to encourage more people to get involved in the foster care program. My wife and I, like you had said, we've been married 37 years. We have two biological sons. They're 37 and 32. I'm pretty sure. I might be a year or so off, but anyway, and so I have three adoptive boys, but never in our marriage had my wife and I ever said, let's adopt children. Some families have unplanned pregnancies. We had unplanned adoptions. That's what I call it. But we were casa parents. We adopted two teenage boys. Were the last boys that we adopted. They're brothers, and they actually had an adoption going through that fell through at the very last minute. And when CPS Energy said they're going to take these boys and nobody would adopt them, they were 14 and 12 at the time, and they said they'll probably be separated. We had worked with them a year in casa and just fell in love with them. And we actually visited Houston, the house that we're going to be adopted into. But when all of that fell through, my wife and I went home, prayed about it, and we said, we need to adopt. And, a lot of people say that, you got to be careful what you do. I'm telling you, a lot of people say that those boys are blessed to be in my home, but we're so blessed to have those boys in our home. And even to last night, I have big ping pong. I have a big living room, and I put a big ping pong table in the living room, and we had doubles, and there's fighting going on. Are you? Hey, I was in and out. My wife has to come in there. Y'all quit fighting. It's so loud in here. But I love that all the boys are at home. Our two older boys live in Costa Rica. They're technology experts, and I do some nearshore development there. Well, they came in for my wife's birthday, so we got a full house right now of kids. But we're just blessed because you take those steps of faith, and God just blesses you tremendously.
Well, thank you for sharing that story and for your service on behalf of the kids of the state, and for living that out in your personal life. Katie, I want to turn to you. Child welfare is an incredibly difficult field to be in from an emotional standpoint in many ways. And I would say that many of us in the field consider this to be a calling. Tell us a bit about your background and what led you to the role that you're in now.
Sure. Well, first, I can relate to the representative. I am a boy mom, and so I can appreciate a house full of noise and energy and chaos. So it's a wonderful thing. But I guess that's a transition to, I don't get a lot of time. I have a busy, hectic household. And so my passion is this work, and it is never ending and thought-provoking and at times gut-wrenching, but I am very driven by the incredible people that I get to work with, like Stacy. I worked within the public agencies, Health and Human Services, and the Department of Family and Protective Services for a number of years, and got to see the kind of inner workings of the agencies that are charged with leading the system. And I have great admiration for the work that they do. However, I really feel like being in the position I am now, leading the state organization that oversees or that doesn't oversee, that gets to work with the community-based organizations that are doing the work, working with foster families, working with youth, working with adoptive families, working with children. That is what's fulfilling. And I get to see the whole perspective from this vantage point.
Well, we're grateful for the work that you do, and you're a wonderful partner for our work at TPPF. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the years and consider you a friend.
Thank you.
Stacy, I want to shift to you. You grew up in foster care and now dedicate your professional life to serving children in the system. Tell us your story and what motivated you to start Central Texas Table of Grace.
So yeah, like I said, like you said, I did grow up in the foster care system, and thank you for having me here today. And it's good to see you again, Andrew and Katie. Thank you for the kind words. But I grew up in foster care, and I had an interesting experience after being in 10 different foster homes. I actually asked my social worker if I could go into a group home because I was just getting sick of being moved around and going from place to place and never knowing what was next. And so I asked my caseworker, if I do my chores and I follow the rules, I can just stay at a group home, right? And she says, oh, Stace, I don't think that you want to go into a group home. There's a lot of rules. You're not going to be able to be a normal kid. I just don't think that's a good idea. And I said, but if I do my chores and I follow the rules, I can just stay there, right? And so she says, well, yeah. And so when I was 15 years old, I moved into Lisa Lane group home, and this was in California. And I told the therapist there was a house therapist, I told him that I wanted to get legally emancipated by the time I was 16. And instead of laughing me out of his office, like I try really hard not to do when my kids come to me and tell me that, he said, you know what, you're going to have to get right to work. He said, no judge is going to emancipate you. You've got to have a job. You've got to have proof that you can be on your own. You've got to do all these things. And he bought me a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. And I really feel like that therapist and that book changed my life and put me on a trajectory for success. I mean, it talks about being proactive instead of reactive, beginning with the end in mind, those things that I assume that you'd learn if you grew up in a traditional household. But I ended up getting emancipated when I was 16 and I was on my own. And I remember thinking that someday I was going to help foster kids the way that therapist helped me, because, he was only in my life for under a year, but he made a huge difference in my life. And I believe that that was the catalyst for my success later in life. And so when I moved to Texas and I had a little bit of a career change, I thought, well, maybe now it's time to fulfill that dream. And I decided I wanted to open a group home for foster kids. So that's kind of where it started 7 years ago.
Thank you for sharing your story with us and for what you do for kids in our community. I mean, we've gotten to know each other fairly well over the last few months, and what you all do at Central Texas Table of Grace is so necessary and really so inspirational. So thank you for joining us today. Katie, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the foster care system is at a critical moment in its history. And while our goal today is really to dig into the solutions and how folks can be part of those solutions, we need to set the stage by talking about the challenges that the foster care system is facing and how we got to where we are today. Could you give us a brief overview of that, Katie?
Sure, and I'll be brief, but I think that DFPS is the state agency that oversees the child welfare system. They operate a call center, they investigate allegations of abuse and neglect, they identify if families need more intervention, such as foster care, and they also operate a contract arm for primary prevention and also do adoptions. But the agency doesn't actually deliver many services. And in fact, this is something that I really had to learn over the years, is that almost 100% of services that are done through the child welfare system are done through community-based organizations all across the state. Texas has been privatized for many years, which means that the state agency contracts with community-based nonprofits to deliver services across the whole continuum. Traditionally, those have been hundreds of contracts managed out of the department's headquarters here in Austin. Much of the contracts have been acquired through open enrollment, which, depending on your community, has yielded capacity growth that hasn't necessarily been developed based on the need or evolved much over the years. So in parts of the state, you have a heavier concentration of certain types of foster care capacity. And that can be because of things like zoning restrictions or lack of zoning restrictions, church and faith-based activity, the presence of private funding, and even universities that really do a lot of work to churn out skilled and qualified caseworkers. So the foster care system is really complex and constantly evolving, and it should be. We're learning every day, and there's new research every day about how to serve children that have experienced trauma. And it's imperfect. So the results of an imperfect system at times can be tragic and devastating, but we really have to learn from those. The most tragic of circumstances are most of the time signals of foundational issues. So we really need to be very balanced and careful in our response. So an example of that might be, and I'm sorry, Representative, that even in your own community, you've had a recent tragic couple of child abuse cases that have caused us all to really be reflective and what we may be missing. And we want to err on the side of caution, which can lead the system to be overly involved in families that may not need it. But the reverse can be true as well. So I think being very careful about how we respond and really paying attention to these symptoms of fundamental issues is a word of caution I would offer. I also have to say the federal government has a heavy hand in how the state system runs. They hold the reins on a lot of funding and can be heavily influential on states and what states can and cannot do. So given all of that, I'd say the most pressing issue facing foster care right now relates to the capacity needs, especially for youth with complex and extreme trauma. These are the kids that you read about in the news that are sleeping in hotels or conference rooms or even churches. These kids have very intensive therapeutic needs that can't just be met by any foster home or any placement. They require highly skilled and trained professionals to care for them. And we either don't have enough of those places available, or we don't have them in the communities where the children are. So to grow that kind of capacity takes time and resources. And the legislature has been responsive to the resources, but it also requires an environment that is conducive to innovation and growth. So we're in the midst of these big shifts, federal and state policies, and we're adding a lot of adding to the pressure at the local level. And when we have an infrastructure that no longer completely meets the needs of the system, we have to change that. So peering into the crystal ball here, I can anticipate that the path we're on is that we have to shift our services. We have to shift to meet the needs of children. There are organizations out there that are committed to this work, but may not have the therapeutic chops, if you will, to be able to meet the needs of the highest needs kids in the system. And so some organizations are choosing a different path. They're not choosing to work in child welfare anymore. Some of them are closing their doors. Others are seeking funding and help to be able to transition their business to be able to meet the needs of these kids. So that's a lot of change at the most granular level and at the highest possible level. And I just want to assure everybody that despite all of these issues, and despite all these problems, and despite what you read, there is amazing work happening every day by organizations like Central Texas Table of Grace. So there remains very committed, very smart people working diligently to try to figure out a way to meet the needs of the children.
Thank you for that. Representative Lujan, bringing it more local, what specific challenges are you all seeing in San Antonio?
Well, she mentioned, we had a couple of child deaths in Bexar County, and it gets everybody riled up and things like that. But one of the things, I think, definitely a capacity issue, but I think it's also, we have to be careful that we're not so punitive, putting just punitive measures. And the reason why I bring that up, we have a facility in my district, and my church works very well with them. We do Bible studies there. Their kids come on Wednesday night. They'll bus them over, and it's a group home for boys. And when I went to go visit them this last time, they carry 75 kids. They only had 32, and this was right at the Christmas time. We took presents, everybody. But my question kept saying, why do we have 32? And this is before I was elected. I was working with this group, and they said, well, now it's gotten so much punitive measures placed on us if any little thing happens wrong, and we'll get heightened monitored. We have to fill out all kinds of extra reports. It's just a heavy burden placed on these folks. And they're telling me, and they say, John, our kids are troubled kids. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about that, and I'll share something with you. If you came to my house, pick a day, you come to my house during the week and you see the way I interact with my children, you're going to say, that's a model home. Mm-hmm. But you come the next week to my house and we have issues going on, you're going to say, man, we got to take those kids away. Because families are dynamic, right? People are people. And so I don't know. And I don't have the answer, but I just know that, yeah, there's a capacity issue, but I think that a lot of the capacity is because people are afraid, and homes are afraid because they're afraid that they're just going to, instead of somebody saying, okay, hey man, you had a runaway or you had an incident, how do we fix it? Let's get it better. And that's different than abuse and neglect, right? So those we need to deal with. But man, if it's something else, we need to work and make it better and adapt to the changing issues that child is going through versus just, okay, it's just like somebody's over them watching, okay, boom, we got him. We can penalize them for this. Bam, heightened monitoring. Now you got to do this. I don't think that's the answer. I'm newly elected to this position, and I'm just to let everybody know, I meet every Friday at 9 a.m. for some child welfare ministry work that I'm doing, and I can get into it more later, but it's being addressed. And I was doing this even before the child deaths, and then now everybody's kind of wanting to jump on board, which is good. We need people involved, but man, we need to be working consistently on this and just constantly making this better. And I think it's going to take enabling legislation to make it better. It's going to change thinking out of the box. And then my answer, I'm a man of faith. I'm thinking the churches. So my big thing is I've got to get to the churches and tell them, you guys have dropped the ball on this. We need to pick it up. And I think that's where we're going to be more effective.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of the punitive approach, because that's something that's really shifting very hard in the last several years. Is our child welfare system has been in a punitive stance, both toward the families of the kids who get removed. The kids who get removed are punished when they act out. The foster care providers are punished if they aren't doing everything exactly perfectly, or if they have mistakes. And there's a movement. What's hopeful for me is when you look across the country and you look toward where child welfare is progressing, due in large part to the Federal Family First Act, there's a cultural change moving toward being more supportive and helping families and helping the people who are involved in this system actually do the job well and be creative about the casework. And now that's a hard shift for the caseworkers who are on the front lines, the investigators and the licensing folks, to move out of that punitive hammer find a nail mindset to the more supportive mindset that I think will be best for not just the families and the kids, but for the system as a whole. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. It's a critically important point.
Very important.
And to that point, Stacy, I want to shift to you. In a recent expert panel report that came out of the federal foster care lawsuit, one of the issues that they found was the system itself dehumanizes the children who enter it. And it noted that even the culture and the terminology, specifically the children without placement, calling them quote unquote CWAP kids, puts undue focus on the children's behaviors and their deficits while failing to identify and nurture their strengths. So I think you're perfectly positioned to help us start solving this problem for Texas right now. Tell us more about who these kids really are that you serve and what makes them so wonderful.
Well, the hard part is going to be telling you that without crying. These kids are so special. First of all, they're not here through any fault of their own in this system. And they've experienced trauma that some of us couldn't even begin to imagine. And so sometimes there are some extra needs and some behaviors and things like that. But ultimately, these are children who need to be cared for. And there's something that's, trauma-informed care is something that we can all learn about, even if we're not in child welfare, because so even being a kid in these days is traumatizing, period, I think. But these kids, trauma-informed care and learning about how to care for someone who's had trauma, it's a big eye opener, because it's not really the same things that you would do, for example, with your own child, or how you would respond to a certain issue with your own child. Trauma-informed care, there's so much to unpack as far as what trauma can do and how to come alongside that youth and help them. But there are so many stories of resilience and every single one of these kids has a story, and every single one of these kids matters, and they are worth it to come alongside and do whatever we can do to help them, because again, they didn't ask for any of this. And I have so many kids. I mean, to this day, I still talk to my very first kid who came through the shelter. I call him my firstborn because he was my first first kid who came in, and I still talk to so many of my kids, and to even pick out, there's just so many wonderful stories of these kids who have come through their adversity and been able to still, have a good life and be able to succeed at things. And I think there's a speaker that I like. His name is Josh Shipp, and he's a former foster child. And he always says that every child is one caring adult away from being a success story or a statistic. And I think that's so true, because just having one caring adult in their life can make such a big difference for these kids. So it's not just about their behavior and the things that they've experienced. Once we learn how to care for these kids properly and we understand where they're coming from, we can see who they really are, and that it's not just behavior. We can see them for who they are.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of trauma. Katie, for folks who are watching and who may be interested in becoming a foster or adoptive parent, what do they need to understand about how trauma has impacted the kids and that who may one day enter their homes?
Yeah. Well, first I want to just acknowledge what Stacy said, and that we have to listen to these kids, these young people. They know, they have the answers. If you ask them, they say they want to go home, or they want to go live with their family or their grandparents, or they want to go to college, or they want to get a job. They know, they know what they want. And I think we do need to listen to them for some of these answers. But children in the foster care system are there because they have been abused or neglected. And that is, in a state like Texas, we do everything we can to prevent a child from coming into the foster care system. We have every child in the foster care system is there because a judge ordered it. And even before that, an investigator at the department did their work, did their job, and determined that that child cannot live safely at home. So if we put our trust in that, and that these children that are in the foster care system are there because they need to be, because they're not safe where they came from, then you can imagine what their life might have been like and the abuse or neglect that they might have lived with. And so that is an awful thing. Plus, to be removed from their home, these kids, despite that their homes may not be ideal, they don't want to be removed. That's all they know. It's their family, it's their siblings, it's their pets, it's their school, it's their neighbors, it's their sports team friends. And to remove them from all of that and put them with strangers is incredibly traumatic. And so just understanding that these kids, they're children, and even the teenagers are children. They don't have the coping mechanisms that we might wish that they had. And therefore, this trauma manifests as behaviors. They will want to fight, or freeze. They will want to, they will act out because they are uncomfortable or nervous or anxious. They may try to run away. They may have attachment issues. They may be too attached. And so just understanding that these kids have very special needs that need to be cared for in a trauma-informed way, and that is a model for truly understand how trauma manifests with children and how to handle these children. So just know going into it, and we want more people to become foster parents, know going into it that you will be trained on how to understand trauma.
Thank you for that. Representative Lujan, as someone who's lived this, what advice would you give to those who are interested in fostering or adopting?
I think Katie kind of hit it on the head. They're going to train you, because I'm one that when we're going to adopt our boys, I thought I don't need training. They're teenage boys. I've already raised boys. I know what I'm doing. But a lot of the nuances, even just something small, like the boys, I went in the closet one time and they were hoarding snacks. And I'm thinking, why do you hoard snacks? Put it in the pantry. You get it anytime you want in the middle of, but they were just accustomed because they didn't know where they were going to get it again, because they spent so many years in foster care. So all these different things. But my big thing is the call to action on this is that, there again, I'm going to go back to that church aspect. I really believe, and if you're listening to this, and if you're a person of faith that goes to church, every single church in Texas needs to have a child welfare ministry within their church. And what I mean by that is that group in the church should know that, man, we got to get people involved in CASA. We need godly men and women involved in CASA. We need to have respite care here at our church for our members that are having foster care. And we have a foster care program in our church, and we're supporting them. And then we have an adoption. And then there's probably other things that you can put in between there. But those are the building blocks that I think that every church needs. And then that church support ministry for maybe an elderly couple say, I can't adopt or anything, but you can pray, you can finance, you can probably become a respite care worker, and you're going to be a model and a teacher and a mentor for foster kids that are going to that church. Why the churches don't have that, I don't know. My dad's a retired minister. My brother's a pastor of the church. I've been meeting with them. We're putting this plan together. That's what I'm doing right now in Bexar County. We've been meeting for the last, since I came in office just a few months ago. And we've been working on this. And I really want to push this out on the south side of San Antonio, Bexar County, my District 118 churches. And hopefully it catches on and it spreads throughout all over. But if we can move that needle just a little bit. So the call to action is get involved, get a program going, and then all the training and all the stuff can be done from that church level. I'm getting you're right. There's a lot of organizations that want to help, but a lot of times they don't know how to hook up. But if you're hooking up at the church and you have your foster care meetings at the church, you have your CASA meetings at the church, we'll move the needle and we'll impact this.
Absolutely. I think that underscores a really important point that was made earlier, this giving the ownership back to the local communities. And the legislature has done incredible work working to do that through our community-based care transformation, and giving the local communities, the local churches, the local nonprofits more ownership and more responsibility in caring for the kids in their communities who are entering the foster care system. And as this is rolled out, Katie, Stacy, this Representative Lujan, this is kind of an open question for everybody. What innovations are we seeing at the local community level? How are communities responding? Stacy, how is Central Texas Table of Grace specifically responding to basically innovating and taking on greater responsibility for the kids who are in the system?
So a good example of that is just in the very beginning when we opened 7 years ago, we're actually an emergency shelter. We're called what's an emergency shelter. Kids are supposed to stay 90 days or less while they're looking for a foster home or a more permanent placement. And we realized right away that kids were not staying 90 days. They were staying 6 months, 7 months. There's nowhere for them to go. So they were staying. Our program immediately pivoted to, okay, this isn't just a stopping point. This is a good chunk of these kids' lives. Like, we need to make sure that they're meeting their goals with their education. We need to make sure their grades are good and they're attending school every day. We need to make sure that they, have goals that they're setting, and that, that we're setting goals and we're advancing them in their life and having them understand this isn't just an overnight thing. Let's, and so now we do life skills classes. If the kid is 14 or older, we immediately start working on getting them an ID. We do a lot of these things, even though normal shelter is just designed to be a stopover. We made all these programs and did all these things because we knew that we had to meet the need, the actual need that was there. We're not just a shelter. We're not just a stopover. And so kind of the same thing now, I'm looking at the changing climate and how can we help with the kids that don't have placement? How can we increase our capacity? What can we do? And the community is such a big part of that, because I'll tell you, since the day I opened, there hasn't been a year that's gone by that I didn't have to raise more than $300,000 for that year to do what we do. And the community comes through on that every single year. And I never know how it's going to happen, but somehow it does. And the community comes together and they rally, and we are able to continue to operate at the level and the care that we give these kids, which is much higher standard. So the community is just a huge part. And that's what allows us to pivot when it's needed, because obviously when you need to add programming or build capacity or do any of these things, it costs money, right? And resources. So
I would add to that, I think this movement towards community-based care, where you're really localizing the work, there is some incredible innovation happening. And some of it is just relationships. To the representative's point about making sure we're involving the faith community and churches, these nonprofits that are working in their community to lead the community-based care networks and initiatives are asking churches for what they need, and they're coming forward. They need respite care. They need mentors. They need meals. They need trips to Disney for the kids, or help underwriting, things like that. There's also innovation in how they are just doing casework. The community-based care organizations, the 4 of them, have had very few CWAP children. And that's because they are just working these cases very creatively, bringing their partners to the table authentically, and identifying what the children's needs are and who can meet the needs, and they're making it happen. They're using technology to seek and grow the capacity, like the data and analytics, to know exactly what kind of capacity they need, not just today, but also tomorrow and down the road. They're procuring in a very precise way exactly what they need to meet those kids' needs. So it's not just a scattershot of kind of who's out there that wants to meet these kids or serve these kids. It's really exactly what they need, and they're curating that in their networks.
I'm glad you brought up the CWAP data, because I was shocked and surprised when I saw some of those numbers that compared the legacy region, what we call the more centralized system, the old way of doing things that was run through the DFPS bureaucracy here in Austin, and then what's going on in the community-based care regions. The discrepancies in the CWAP numbers, to me, really illustrated that this new way of doing foster care, this community-based model, truly is the future and truly is working at solving some of these most complex problems that the system faces. And that leads me to kind of the last phase of our conversation today, which is solutions. And Representative Lujan, as we're fast moving toward the 88th legislature, I can't believe it's less than a year away.
Yeah.
What are some of your priorities for child welfare?
Well, I look at child welfare from my perspective, a 2-prong approach. Number one is the church thing that I'm working with, and all of that, and getting them involved. And man, I want to applaud Stacy for using all her past to recreate and make a better future for others. My 3 adopted boys, I love them so much. When we go to churches and speak, they'll get up there and they'll speak from the heart, and people are touched because you said it so right. They're great kids. And if we just give them that opportunity to flourish, they'll flourish. But a lot of times they're just kind of pressed down. So I look at it from that angle. And the other one is the legislative angle. And that's when I'm meeting with all these foster groups in San Antonio. I work a lot with SJRC. I love that organization. One Hope for Kids. Those are the 2 big ones that I work with. And then I've got a laundry list of things that we're going to do and we're going to change. But that's why I want to also encourage Katie and Stacy, and applaud you, Andrew, for the work that TPPF does. And there's a lot of other things to cover, but you guys are on board with this. I met with Rafa and said, man, I want to meet with you guys. How do we make this better? And I think we have to have legislators that are willing to make the tough steps and do the right things so that we can put together a vibrant system that's truly going to help our children. And we need to really do that, working together.
That's a great point. And the families and the kids of this state are the foundation of the future. All the prosperity that Texas enjoys, rooted in those strong families. And if we don't have those strong families, we don't have a strong Texas. So I really appreciate your work on this issue specifically. Katie, I want to get a little more detailed. One of the biggest issues I think that lawmakers will need to address, we touched on it earlier with the discussion of the punitive approaches that have happened in licensing and monitoring, is really looking at how are we licensing and regulating the foster care providers and the foster care homes. Do you see this as a big issue coming up in the 88th legislature, and how should legislators be approaching this issue?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the biggest issues right now. We have got to strike the balance between wanting to ensure a sound regulatory system, sound contracting, getting it right with regard to identifying abuse and neglect, with wanting to create an environment that is conducive to serving kids, wanting more people and organizations to get involved, wanting the public to have confidence in the system. We need churches and families and everyone to rally and root for the system. We need them to have confidence when they call the hotline that the right response will be taken. And if we don't strike that balance, and that's tough. I know it's a needle that has to be thread. We are not going to continue to thrive, and we're going to continue to struggle. But we have to support organizations that are doing right and doing well, and the ones that aren't need to be helped either out or helped to get better. Our state agency needs to continue to do what they can do to be good partners with the private sector that are delivering the services. We need just careful calibration of all of this.
Well, before we open it up to audience Q&A, I want to bring it home with a question that I think is on the minds of most of our audience. We've seen it come through with some of the questions that have been submitted online already. How can the average Texan help out? Most people, I would venture, watching this aren't child welfare professionals. I know some are. They're just average, everyday Texans who have a passion for serving children and their neighbors in their communities. So, Stacy, I want to start with you, but I want to pose this question to all of our panelists. How can each individual Texan step up and help be part of the solution?
There's something for everybody. I mean, from the smallest, tiniest thing, as far as bringing a package of toilet paper to a child welfare organization, to actually mentoring a child. There's so many opportunities. So I would just encourage, the churches, talking to your pastor, asking if there's a program or a local child welfare organization that you can support. But there's so many things that help us as an organization, in-kind donations, monetary donations, even things like this, where I'm speaking on this panel right now. Andrew had the Texas Public Policy Foundation, they did a little Christmas drive for us, and got some Christmas presents and some things off of our wish list. Huge help for Christmas, especially when we got 3 new kiddos right before Christmas. Big help. And then a couple days later in the mail, I get a $20,000 check from someone in the audience, relative, that was touched by the mission. So really, even just spreading the word about the issues, or talking about an organization, or sharing an organization's Facebook post, there's so many things that you can do as an individual that don't even cost money, that you can do to help with the situation. So we just really appreciate our community's support, and it's just, we couldn't do it without our community. So there really is something for everybody.
Representative Lujan, what would you say? How could the average Texan, what do you want to see folks in your district step up and do?
Man, I tell you, she hit it on the head when she said there's something for everybody. I had never even heard of CASA before in my life. And then when I went to explore it, my wife and I got in, and you just meet your child once a month. And it was really cool because that child, the boys that we had, they had different caseworkers constantly, different homes. The only consistent person in their life was us. And we were just meeting them once, twice a month. And for that whole year until now they don't encourage the CASA people to adopt their CASA kids, and we weren't, but when their adoption fell through, we stepped in. But what a blessing that was to be part of someone's life. I really believe, and going back to that faith thing, that we're created for 2 reasons. And that's to love God with all our heart and to love our fellow man. And that's like a calling for everybody, that we need to be doing these things. When we begin to serve others, especially those that are the least served, or the ones that are really in harm's way, when we do that, you have purpose for living. That actually cures a lot of ailments, mental ailments and physical ailments, because I think I feel younger because my older boys are already grown and gone, and I have young ones at the house that I got to compete with and play games with and things like that. But you get there's just blessings from here to there, but those don't happen unless we step up and do something. And I want to encourage you, if you're a faith-based person, get your church involved. And if they don't seem too involved, call me, call my office, especially if you're in Bexar County, because I'll go over there and help, because we need to have every church doing this. It's good, not just for the children that are being served, but it's good for us that are serving. We always think, we need a blessing, and we do, but don't overlook the fact, the blessings that you're going to you're going to get, because you're going to begin to start living why God created you to be here to begin with. And you start getting the blessings on top of that. We need to step up. We need to do these things. And this encourages me when we have panelists like this that are so involved in doing the things that you guys are doing. God bless you guys for what you're doing, and together we'll make a difference.
I can think of no better way of wrapping this up. That was perfect and beautiful. Thank you for sharing that word with us. I want to open it up very briefly to some audience questions that have been submitted online. If you're watching, there should be a chat function in whatever platform that you're watching through where you can submit questions, and they'll pop up on my screen. I apologize that we won't be able to get to everyone's question. There's a question here that's kind of interesting. And Katie, this one might be one for you with your pulse on what's going on with the providers. Someone's asking if the crisis at the southern border is contributing to the lack of placements for kids in the foster care system, especially as we have an influx of children coming across the southern border that may or may not have a family with them.
Right. No, that is an interesting question. That is something that we have been mindful of, and certainly there are organizations in Texas who specialize in serving unaccompanied minors or kids that come across the border, and those are federally administered programs. There are some organizations that have a specialty in that. They don't tend to overlap with the foster care or Texas child welfare system significantly, but kind of goes back to the previous conversation. I do want to keep an eye on, organizations that are kind of done with child welfare or feel like maybe they don't have a place in the Texas child welfare system might be seeking other opportunities, and that would certainly be an option for them. I haven't seen that happen right now, but it's something that I think we should keep an eye on.
Another question is related to some conversation that we've already had about what advice do we have for folks who want to get involved as either a foster or adoptive parent. I'll modify it just a little bit and be a little bit more specific. Is where can people go to connect with organizations that can help them if they want to become a foster or adoptive parent?
Sure, I can take that one, but welcome any others jumping in. So there are community-based nonprofits all over the state. We have a list on our website, the Texas Alliance website. And
could you plug the website address real quick?
www.tacfs.org. Thanks. There are, and specifically, if you are interested in being a foster or adoptive parent, you are looking for a child placing agency. Those are agencies that work with families to walk them through the process to get verified or licensed. So there's trainings and there's background checks and there's all kinds of home studies. The representative knows this very well. It is quite a journey, but that is the agency that will shepherd you through that will support you through that. And then once you get verified, then you're open to serve children who are in the foster care system. And I think what I would say also is keep in mind, we need families that are both willing to foster children that we hope are reunified. So families that are just happy to be a foster family till that child goes back home, or families that are interested in adoption, because we do have many kids that are currently in the foster care system that are available for adoption.
One final question, and I want each of our panelists to answer this. Do you feel optimistic about the future of the child welfare system? Is positive change coming? Representative Lujan, we can start with you.
I'll start with me. I think there is positive change coming. I think there's a bigger awareness now. I think through work with TPPF and man, it's so important for our panelists to be panelists on other things, because when we hear the stories of Stacy and Katie and the things they're doing, it encourages. I'm encouraged today. I was just hearing those testimonies. So I do think there's some, and I'm using it also. I'm optimistic because not patting myself on the back, but I want to run the charge for the churches. And I'm thinking if we can make those things happen, it's even better. There's nothing like helping a young person succeed. There's so many things, my two boys that when I adopted them at 14 and 12, they're 22 and 20, and they're going to UTSA. One's going to University of Texas San Antonio, and the other's at Palo Alto College, getting ready to go to Texas A&M San Antonio. What stories they have, and the thing, and not only that, but They get I didn't realize they got their college free, which was good for me. It helped me out a lot. But we went in and they have money there for foster kids to go to college. A lot of these kids don't even know that. And here I was, I'm involved in this kind of stuff, part of state rep, and I didn't even know it. And I was just blessed. I said, wow, these guys got free college all paid for. How many kids? We're not even preparing those. I mean, we should be preparing those 14, 15, 16-year-olds. You got to get to college because you get your college paid for. You can go you can get your doctorates and everything else paid for at a Texas State University. Why aren't we pushing those kind of things? So I'm optimistic because the word's getting out. People are moving. We have good people moving. And I think things are coming together nicely, hopefully.
Katie, to you, are you optimistic about the future?
Absolutely. Yep, I am. And I know this sounds a little saccharine, but I mean, I get to see the work. I get to see it firsthand, and it just it's uplifting. The work that's underway out there in communities all across the state, like Central Texas Table of Grace, is what is giving me so much optimism, and the incredible leaders at the local level, also at the state level. This state's leadership cares about kids. Both sides of the aisle, both chambers, all branches, they care about kids, and we are all striving to do right by kids. So I really am optimistic.
Stacy, I'll let you have the last word. Are you optimistic about the future of foster care in Texas?
I am absolutely optimistic. And Representative brought up a good point about the college. I actually started a new program for kids aging out of foster care about a year ago, called Grace 365. And so we have 10 kids in that program now. And so that's one of my things. And one of my past employees, my previous administrator, Pat Foster, always used to tell the kids, if you really want to get back at the state, just go get your PhD because they'll pick up the bill. So you want to get back at them, you just go all the way through. So, we do want, I feel so optimistic, especially with this new program, because I always told myself, if I could just help one, it was worth it. And we're helping more than one. So I'm just really excited about the community and the spotlight that you guys are putting on this, because these kids need us, and who else but us is going to do it. So let's go.
Let's go indeed.
Awesome.
Stacy, Katie, Representative Lujan, thank you all so much for joining us today. But more importantly, thank you for what you're doing on behalf of the kids of this state. For those of you who joined us, thank you for being with us. If you want more information about our work on this issue or any of the other issues that we tackle at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, visit our website, www.texaspolicy.com. Until next time, thanks for joining us.